Hi there. So I'm going to pick up from Rachel's points there, and I'm going to talk more about how you can use those same approaches within your organisations. So regardless of what professional networks or businesses or local communities you're part of, there are chances to influence all sorts of decision makers in different ways. So I'm going to talk from a railway perspective about 3 places where we have really taken a what if approach to imagining how things could be different and getting a deeper understanding of the problems that we face through listening to more voices. The first area that I want to look at is about trees and vegetation. So you're driving along and you're looking out the train window and you can see lots of trees next to the line. You probably think they're quite pretty, right? If you're a train driver, however, you see the trees and you think, if there's a storm and one of those trees comes down and goes on the line and I drive into it, I can't stop and I can't steer around it because I'm on a track. So that's absolutely terrifying, right? That's one of our biggest safety risks, and drivers are absolutely terrified by it. So that means that the maintenance staff tend to have a look at the trees and think, they're a bloody nuisance. We've got to keep chopping them down. We've got to manage that vegetation so it's not in the way of any of the signals. It's not likely to fall over onto the track, and it's not likely to damage any of the overhead cables and things like that. But then if you look at it from another perspective, perhaps your house looks out onto a railway line, and you look at the trees at the end of the garden and you quite like them, you enjoy the birds, and then one day the trees are gone. Suddenly you can see the trains going past and it feels like you can hear a lot more noise than you used to, because you get both a visual and an audible impact of the trains going past, which are shielded by those trees. So actually those trees are doing a whole range of different things. And one of the changes of perspective that has happened in the last few years is that a lot of people raised significant concerns that the way that the railway was managing that vegetation was really focused on the railway's point of view. It was really focused on the train drivers and the maintenance staff trying to manage a safety risk. But what we didn't see, though, was that we have a national linear nature reserve. We have something which allows us to join up a whole range of different habitats across the country and allows animals to migrate via those bits of habitat. And in the most nature depleted country in Europe, every bit of habitat that we could make more biodiverse and able to contribute to that thriving of biodiversity, we've got to do everything we can to look after it. But funnily enough, the railway has never had any biodiversity targets. It wasn't required to look after biodiversity other than compliance with the law. So obviously we checked for bird nests before we cut the trees down, because you need to do that under the law. And we thought we were pretty good, actually. We thought we took a pretty decent approach to ecology surveys and generally trying to do the right thing. And we found people asking questions in Parliament, spurred on by a huge outcry in the local media from local people who saw trees being chopped down and said, you haven't talked to us about this. You haven't explained to us why you're doing that. You haven't engaged and helped us to see how what you're doing is the best way of managing your ecology. And what was fantastic is a QC was asked to produce a report. It's called the Barley Report. It's available online. I'll put a link in the chat. And that was published in 2018. And the way it looked at it from all of those different perspectives, and it asked people, it asked the railway, but also the Department for Transport, to set some different targets and to start looking at vegetation in a different way. And I'm pleased to say that we are now working towards no net loss within the next couple of years, getting a fantastic baseline of all of our ecology across the whole network. And then we're working towards no net gain, which will be written into our license from the next funding agreement. So I think that's a massive change in just a couple of years, and a lot of people and the media helped make that happen and helped change a mindset around what we can do. So a second area is race and gender equality. So I have to say that the Black Lives Matter protests this year took me a bit by surprise, but we've seen just how baked in inequalities are making some people in this country much poorer, much more exposed to coronavirus, much more exposed to air pollution, and much more likely to die earlier than everybody else. And I think there's a growing recognition from across the country that actually we're not happy with that. We don't want that to be the way that people's lives are being lived. And so from an internal perspective, it led to a lot of soul searching. Network Rail was one of the first companies to publish an ethnicity pay gap report. And well, I'm glad we published the report, but it didn't show that we were shining stars, okay? And then we looked at, we did an internal review of all of the data for the last couple of years for our employment. And we found, if you asked me before I saw this data how we were doing, I would have said, well, I think we're doing our best. I now look at the data and I think there's a lot more we need to do. And what's changing is that we're bringing people together in focus groups to learn from what is holding people back. Why is it that we're continuing to struggle to recruit people into roles that Black people are applying for jobs at Network Rail at twice the rate of white people, and they are getting 50% less jobs at the end of the process, okay? So they are massively being screened out by unconscious bias. And that was one of the key findings of the report. And I think if you did repeat that in other companies, you'd probably find something similar. I don't think it's just the railway that's racist. But we didn't think we had a big problem. And we've also got a reverse mentoring set up. So for the next 6 months, every member of our executive leadership team has somebody from within the company who comes from a different background. We've got somebody with an experience of disability, we've got people who've come from sort of gender and low income backgrounds, and we've also got a range of different ethnic backgrounds, explaining what it's actually like being a person with that experience within Network Rail. And then if you then look at the external side of it, if we want infrastructure that meets people's needs, we've got to involve those people in making that infrastructure. You'd think that was obvious, but if you have a look at Sustrand's Cycling for Everyone report and Wheels for Wellbeing inclusive cycling reports, what they show is that we've got an image in our head of what a cyclist looks like in this country. And that image is completely different from the one that my parents have in the Netherlands. So in the Netherlands, everybody cycles and it doesn't matter who you are. In the UK, the common picture of a cyclist is someone who's on 2 wheels, not 3 or even 4, on a self-powered bike or a cargo bike or one with those kids things on the front. And they are doing it because typically we're talking about blokes who are confident at cycling on the road. We're not talking about children, we're not talking about elderly people, we're not talking about people with disabilities. And interestingly, women and people from ethnic minorities and people from low income areas all feel massively excluded from cycling. And again, I didn't know this, but I led a session last week with a disabled cyclist from Wheels for Wellbeing, and we went through the data with a whole range of Network Rail engineers, and we talked about what we need to do differently. And I just encourage you to try and get out there, find things that help people look at the problem from a different perspective, and then bring that into the conversation with your teams. And you don't necessarily have to go company-wide to all of the engineers in the business straight away. You could go with a smaller group of people first. And when we were talking about building up trust, I think that's a really good way of doing that. And then finally, I go to decarbonisation. So I'd just like to put on record that I absolutely love the folks who were willing to go out on the streets with Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion, because you have completely changed the tone of the conversation in Network Rail. I spent years in Network Rail banging the drum saying our weather's getting worse, we're at serious risk because I mean, I look after earthworks and drainage, so flooding and slope failure is a fact of my life, and it is getting measurably worse year on year, and it's getting year on year more dangerous. So we've been kind of saying, give us a bit more money, help us to cope with this problem, but also can we stop adding to the problem, please? And finally, in the last 18 months to 2 years, that has changed. We are now on a pathway with science-based targets agreed and about to be published, so that we have committed to achieving the zero carbon by 2050. We're dealing with all the technical challenges that goes along with, but I would say that there's so much to do. You know, there's a whole lot of mobilisation that we've been doing to bring people together who want to solve the problem and get them talking about what their contribution to the problem is. There's a lot of upskilling. There's also a lot of pilot projects and scaling those pilot projects up. But I just wanted to use this as an opportunity to say that public pressure outside in the public sphere can make a huge difference to your ability to make change happen within organisations that you're already part of. And those same techniques of building trust, talking, finding out where people are coming from and what their perspectives are, and helping them to see how an environmental focus can help the business along, that makes a big difference. All right.